Hello, hi. I'm really pleased that we are taking part in the Clean Speech Project. It's a great initiative that reminds us of the power of our words and promoting positive speech. You know, the Torah regulates what we eat through the laws of kashrus, but at the same time, the laws of Lashon Hara also require us to be conscious about what goes out of our mouths as well. Now, I'm delighted that we are joined this evening by Alex Holder, who is an award-winning filmmaker. Alex, thank you for joining us and taking the time to speak to us.
Pleasure.
We'd love to hear your perspective on this subject. So let's get straight into things. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into filmmaking?
Sure. So I sort of fell into it, actually. I sort of set up a company back in 2010 that was a bit of a silly idea, but it did okay, actually. It was to make documentaries about people's lives. So they were private family films. So generally, a husband was turning 50 or 60 years old, and their wife would take their husband's money and give it to me, and me and my best friend at the time would fly all over the world and interview all their friends and family and make this kind of "this is your life" movie. And the subject of the movie didn't know about it, so it was a surprise. And it was great fun. We were traveling to Mozambique and Moscow and Zambia and Panama and all over the world, and it did really well. And then from that, I then went into, I guess, sort of commercial filmmaking. But it was one of those things where I was very lucky in that I didn't know I had a passion for this until I started doing it, and then once I started, you can't stop, and it's an amazing thing. So I'm very lucky and privileged, and here we are.
In those early days, you must have seen how impactful words are to people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's this child or a poem that we got taught in school, which is sticks and stones can break one's bones, but words will never harm. And I always had a major issue with that, because I think that it's the complete opposite, really. And I think that words start some of the most traumatic and terrible events in human history.
Right.
It starts with words, and those are so powerful. And we've seen in today, and obviously in history, how dangerous words can be, and the results that they have.
Right. Do you think we grossly underestimate the power of words in the modern world?
Absolutely. Because I think nowadays as well, where we live in the echo chamber, so we sort of only listen to people that we agree with, and we don't actually listen to the people we don't agree with. And I've always been much more interested in listening to people that I don't agree with. And so for me, and obviously right now, what's so in vogue is the freedom of speech, and especially in America, and where you draw the line for people saying things that are incredibly dangerous. Should you allow them the platform? And then obviously with technology and social media, normally people like the crazies would sort of only be far away, and you wouldn't really hear that much. Right. It was quite difficult for them to get the major platform. Nowadays it's much easier for rhetoric to be disseminated and to be heard, and obviously now with AI and the things you can do. So so it's definitely such an important topic to talk about, and it's absolutely really it's just so important that people understand that there are people that listen and agree with things that you or I don't. Right. And that's very important.
As a filmmaker, do you feel that sense of responsibility in terms of the power of words that, as you say, have that global audience?
Absolutely. So one of the things about the latest series that I made, which was about Trump, is that there was this argument that we were giving him a platform and a stage and letting him speak. So on the one hand, I'm a big believer in free speech, and I think that this was at the time the president of the United States, and he was a historic figure, and so it was obviously vital to listen to what he is saying. So for me, it wasn't I was giving him a platform and it was wrong. It was, well, we need to listen to what this guy is saying, especially obviously later on whilst we're making the film, he started the madness on the election not having been done correctly. So it's very important to understand what he's saying. And then what was also important was to couch that with the alternative viewpoints as well. So context is imperative. So it wasn't like we just let him say his piece and then give no information. We had journalists and others that would contextualize the things he said, and also obviously say it wasn't true, and people can watch it and come to their own conclusion.
Right.
I would hope, though, that with respect to that series, that the conclusion they come to is the one that is, based in reality. But yes, it is important to listen to people you don't agree with, but obviously also important to contextualize and
Sure.
and understand exactly what's being said.
Sure. Perhaps we'll park Trump for a moment and come back to him, because I'm sure people will see a bit more about that. Yeah. But let's go back to the beginning. You're the founder of AJH Films.
Yeah.
Now, can you tell me how important is equitable and dynamic storytelling to you?
Imperative. It's for me, it's the most important part of what I do, but important in the sense of why I love doing it. The films and the stories that I want to tell, are, some would argue, are controversial, and I approach them in a way where I hope I'm as equitable and fair as possible. Because, again, as I was mentioning before, we live now in this world of echo chambers and only listening to what we want to hear. And I think it's so important for people to hear the other side of the story. And there are always two or multiple sides of a story. And I think for me, one of the things that's so cool, I guess, about what I do is that I get to make films and tell stories about things that I'm very interested in.
Right.
And so I get to hear all the aspects and all the different iterations of a particular topic. So yes, my approach has always been to find the middle ground, or if there isn't one, to try and show how there may not be one. But to get there, you need to listen to the extremes on all sides, and right. And I think that is absolutely imperative and so important in terms of documentary storytelling, for sure.
Right. Now, in 2016, you made an unbelievable film, an incredible film called Keep Quiet, which was, as I said, unbelievable documentary about an anti-Semitic politician who actually then finds out they're Jewish. It won an award, I think, the most valuable documentary award. Can you tell us a bit about that film?
Sure. So, I mean, this is one of those stories where, you can't really make it up. And we were tasked with trying to find a story in Central Europe, actually Hungary specifically, about the rise of anti-Semitism. And whilst we were there, looking for that story, this particular event took place where the founder or the co-founder of the largest far-right party at the time in Europe, so the party's called Jobbik, and they were, outspoken anti-Semites and anti-Roma and sort of racist. And one of the co-founders of this party is then outed as being a Jew.
Right.
And he's then immediately fired from this party that he created, and then bizarrely embraces Orthodox Judaism and then does a full, I guess, 180. Right. And so we're there during that sort of journey that he takes, and it was an amazing documentary to make. It was really fascinating, and seeing how he coped with it all, but also how the rabbi that took him under his wing coped with it as well. Right. And in some ways it fits so perfectly into this topic, right, which is the power of words. I mean, this is a guy who was, I mean, some of the Jews that were living there at the time, sort of said he was like a mini Hitler. He was unashamedly anti-Semitic, and he used that rhetoric to build his career. I mean, he was one of the youngest members of the European Parliament, and he set up a political entity in Hungary, and so he absolutely understands the power of words, right, and used it.
He didn't hold back. Sorry, he didn't hold back at all in his words.
No,
yeah,
not at all. Absolutely, yeah. And he knew and knows the power of words, and he's very good at using them. I mean, some of the most dangerous people and some of the most impressive and remarkable people in history have been wordsmiths. I mean, they are, it is those words created really everything in some ways. And I'm not the most religious person in the world, but the beginning of the Bible is really about how God uses words and created existence, and so I think sort of let there be light, right? So I think words are everything, and he absolutely knew the power of them, and he used them very badly at the beginning of his career, and tried to undo what he did later on in his life.
Right. It's very interesting you mentioned that. I was talking to someone recently, and we were talking about the power of words, and obviously how impressive great orators can be. And actually, talking about it in the Jewish tradition, Moses, the greatest Jewish leader ever, actually, the Torah records, actually, he wasn't a great orator. In fact, didn't want the role because he felt that he wasn't suitable to it because he couldn't speak. And I think that's an amazing narrative almost on the fact that it's not the way you say things, how you say things, it's actually the words that you're using and understanding.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So he
absolutely.
and I'm going to attempt the politician's name, Segedi, is it?
Segedi, yeah.
Thank you. So he never held back in what he said about and expressing his hatred of Jews. How do you think when he discovered he was a Jew, how do you think that affected him? I mean, you up close and personal with him. How do you think that affected him personally, professionally, as a public figure? The fact that he'd said one thing and now obviously was almost, you said, doing a 180.
Yes, I mean, he is the stereotypical politician. So what I mean by that is that he absolutely loves the attention and the adoration. I think anyone that goes into politics is someone that likes to be listened to and wants attention. I mean, I'm not saying that they don't also have belief in making the world a better place or their country better, etc. But not being so cynical, but let's just say most politicians like the attention. And I think for him, his whole real USP had just evaporated. I mean, here he is, the very person that he was saying he hated. So what he had, the choices that were really left, I mean, most people would have just faded into into oblivion, essentially, right? And that would be the end. But that would mean no more attention. So the only thing he can then do is, well, let's embrace Orthodox Judaism. So did he do it authentically? Is he really sorry? That's up for an audience to decide when they watch the film. And I think it's pretty interesting seeing the differences of opinion when people have told me about what they think about him after they've seen the film, and they always ask me what I think, and I say, well, it's up to you. But yes, I mean, but credit where credit's due. The guy was in his 30s, and to really prove his commitment to Judaism, he went and had a circumcision. So that's a pretty big deal if you if you just want the attention. But
I think also that also brings also something that other saying, which is actions often speak louder than words. We think what I say is very powerful. But actually, sometimes what you do be far more powerful than what you say.
Absolutely. And I think though for him, he is an extremist. So i.e. he set up an extreme party. So it's in his DNA that he's going to go all the way, right? And so that was something which maybe to him wasn't as much of a big deal as it may be for somebody else. But either way, I think objectively it's quite a big deal.
It's a fascinating story. I mean, incredible.
Absolutely. And I think what was really amazing was how did he not know? And and this is not actually so unusual. After the Holocaust, there was this, and some Holocaust survivors, still believe this, and it's totally understandable. And his grandmother, who was in Auschwitz, who was alive and is in the film, she passes away, whilst we were making it, but she was in the film, and she was terrified and convinced that it would happen again. So she tried everything in her power to ensure that her kids, did not grow up Jewish. She had them, baptized, and obviously kept this secret, as long as she could. And so I think, that, it's understandable, but again, it comes back to words and how anti-Semitism and this, remarkable story, really only came about, from the words that people were speaking, since the beginning of time, really.
Right. We talk
Absolutely.
about the Holocaust. We hear again, time and again, those who survived, who actually refused to speak about it. To actually put it into words was just too difficult for them, too painful.
Exactly.
Many years afterwards.
You
mentioned the rabbi who was involved in that story. I think it was Rabbi Oberlander. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and obviously we see how he helps him. And to what extent do you think what he said and the way he said it actually impacted not only on Segedi, but also on the viewer as well?
So it's interesting that, I think at the core, Rabbi Oberlander believed very much in this concept of repentance. And so, he felt after thinking about it and then choosing to help Chanad, and obviously by helping him, immersing himself in immense controversy, was worth it because he was doing what he felt was the right thing to do according to his understanding of Judaism. So so then the next step is, okay, well, how do I do this? And if we look at it from the point of view that Chanad needed someone to help him go on this journey, for cynical reasons, well, he had someone that by default was going to help him because he believes in repentance, which is interesting because I think there were moments where Chanad may have originally felt this was a fun thing to do, and he wasn't necessarily doing it for the right reasons.
Right.
At a certain point, he saw the love and care that the rabbi had towards him, and how he ended up becoming almost a spokesperson, that he may have actually started to really believe that what he was doing, how Chanad was doing, was the right thing to do. So yeah, there's no doubt though that the relationship between the two of them was very profound whilst I was there, and I think it still is pretty close.
Right.
And I think that and there's an amazing scene when I don't want to ruin the film, but there's one point where Chanad goes to Canada, and he's not allowed into the country, and he was there to give a speech, and so essentially the rabbi, he kind of gave the speech on a video camera, and then had to leave the country. And when the speech finished, the audience were sort of in an uproar, and the rabbi had to defend Chanad, at this event. And it was pretty amazing to see him do that, and
wow.
See that dynamic. So it was pretty remarkable. Yeah.
There was an amazing line I heard the rabbi saying. Something like, I pray to God that I wouldn't say anything wrong, that I only to say the right words in the right time, something like that.
Yeah. It's one of those, it's funny when you meet people in real life who actually speak in quotes. I always when am I going to say a quote? But yeah, I mean, it's an amazing line, and he really believes it, and he really truly felt that everything he says has an impact on this topic, but really on anything. And I think right. Public speakers who have that attitude, rabbis have that attitude, are it is important. I mean, people really do listen to what these people say, and I think that having that mentality is incredibly positive for sure.
Yeah, like equally every one of us, if we had that attitude in terms of I pray to God that I wouldn't say anything wrong. I mean, that's a good starting point to, in terms of this idea of clean speech and positive speech and avoiding anything negative.
Yeah. But one man's negative is another man's positive, though, right? So, that's where it gets complicated. Right?
Yeah, true. Yeah, look, there's no black and white. There's so much where there's subtleties and nuances. But this is, the mindset of avoiding saying things which are openly, clearly negative.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And that made me lead this on back to what we spoke about at the beginning about Donald Trump and the 3-part docuseries you made called Unprecedented, which was a word which was used a lot, wasn't it, during the pandemic? I don't know how much in LA, but definitely in this country it was.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was funny because I remember commenting on the fact that you would almost never hear this word, and then it started being used around about Brexit time.
Right.
Yeah, all the sort of the constitutional crises and all that stuff that was happening. And then it happened, obviously, COVID. And then with Trump and his rhetoric on the election. And so, it was just like the perfect word really to use for this crazy story that we were there to capture.
Was there a bit of irony in there, or a lot of irony in there, or none at all?
Oh, always irony, yeah, right. Which isn't always understood by the audience in this, in America. But but yeah, it's certainly. I mean, the series is, sort of fundamentally ironic, I would say. Yeah.
Would you say that, thinking about Trump and thinking about rhetoric and saying that some of his thinking one particular part of his rhetoric caused the most consequential event in US political history? Is that hyperbole, or do you think that's...
No, it's absolutely accurate. Absolutely accurate. And I think you delve into hyperbole when you are the most powerful man in the world, right? So by virtue of being the most powerful human being on earth, anything you say is huge and is big. And then when you're the most powerful man on earth and you don't accept the peaceful transfer of power, which is the fundamental tenet, really, in American democracy, and you undermine the sanctity of the vote, you are going to cause immense fractures in society. And the event that took place on the 6th of January was the culmination of that rhetoric. And it just shows how, people say, well, Trump didn't, tell them to go, which actually I disagree with. He did tell them to go, but, or they'll say, oh, he didn't tell them to break in, or, he didn't intend for this. I mean, the guy had spent 2 months after the election and even preceding it, talking about the sanctity of the vote, and then how, without any evidence whatsoever, continue this position. And the proof of all of this is, they had about 60 court cases and they lost all of them, except one, which wasn't really relevant to the election. His own attorney general, who is a real right-wing Republican, who absolutely would want a Republican president to stay in the White House, came to the conclusion there was no evidence whatsoever. So, he was really one of the only people, amongst anyone that knew anything about the election that was saying that it was a fraud. And he, unashamedly just continued bashing it, and then is surprised or claims he wasn't responsible for the events of January 6th. So, the power of words are absolutely imperative. I mean, remember that moment during COVID where he was talking about injecting, bleach into into your veins. So you've got some people who will say, oh, well, he didn't really mean it, or he was joking, or whatever. Right. But again, it just shows the power of words, which is that some people won't necessarily, understand sarcasm or irony or joking, or maybe he actually meant it. But that's why, these, being a prime minister or a king or a president is the responsibilities are so huge, because you've got people who listen to you and will follow you. Yeah. And, with respect to January 6th, 2 people on that very day died, in the Capitol. One lady was shot, another was crushed to death, right, because of his words. His words. Yeah. And obviously, back in history, I mean, there's, immense number of examples, not being, the Holocaust being one, which is a result of, horrific words and rhetoric and demagoguery and anti-Semitism and racism. So, right, these people didn't go around killing people just because they came up with the idea. I mean, they believed in, and I'm not making a moral equivalency here. I'm just saying that words obviously have an impact, sort of beyond anything we can even comprehend. Right, and clearly, what clearly comes out is the more power a person has, the more responsibility they have. Absolutely, in what they say, how they say it, where they say it. It's credible for him to claim that he didn't think or believe that his words would have that consequence, that result. Yeah. Just not. And if he did believe it, it just makes him even more foolish than what people already think. Right. You're currently in production of another film, aren't you, about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Something that was, unfortunately, once again in the news at the moment. Tell us a little bit about that, please. I picked the really easy subjects, right? Yes, clearly. I mean, again, sort of speech and words are so relevant to this particular issue. I mean, even as we speak, some of the comments that that people talk about is the PR war, right? What does that even mean? The way the conflict is portrayed in the Western media, so sort of outside of the actual conflict zone, is so important to the belligerents on both sides, right? So the words are absolutely imperative in this. And then obviously there's the fundamental debate about who does this belong to, right? So you've got some people saying, well, the Bible and the words of the Bible prove that we belong here, and there's others that say no, it's in other books or other texts and things. So I think, and again, the creation of Israel, in essence, the modern state, came about, people saying yes or no in a United Nations resolution. So the power of a simple word resulted in the establishment of a country, right? Yeah. And then you've got questions about, sort of what does it mean? What is the state of Israel? Is it the land, for the Jewish people? And there's a debate about that, So, the entire conflict in some ways is really down to vocabulary, and in some place where a comma should go in a potential peace agreement. Right. There's an amazing story that I heard regarding Jerusalem from Shlomo Ben Ami, who is one of the participants at the Camp David negotiations. and he was talking to the late Saib Erekat in Andrews Air Force Base, and he was saying to him how they were really getting quite close to an agreement, and obviously the big really issue was Jerusalem and Temple Mount, and he said to Shlomo Ben Ami said to Saib Erekat, look, we'll give you sovereignty over Temple Mount on one condition, that you don't do any excavations, on there.
Yes.
To sort of potentially destroy any of the Jewish relics, and Erekat said, yeah, of course we can agree to that. So he goes, no, but we need to include that in the agreement,
right?
And we can't just say you won't do it, and we need to give a reason why, i.e. that at some point in history there was a Jewish temple, and that wasn't agreed. They could not agree on that particular position. So again, it's
comes down to
words and understanding exactly of a particular thing, which the result of that is now what's going on, sort of 20, 30 years later.
Right.
So it is pretty incredible what words and meaning have on people's lives.
And variants in narratives as well. You've got narratives
exactly.
on both
I mean,
sides, people looking on the inside. And again, in your experience from making this film, have you seen how the power of words could potentially escalate or de-escalate tensions in the situations?
Sure. I mean, you've got the tragic events of of Rabin's assassination, right? And how his words led to, at the time, the most significant and positive situation with or at least the intention was for it to lead to the most positive relations with the Palestinians and with the Israelis. But then words on the other side resulted in his death. So yeah, and then obviously the more rhetoric and belligerent a person is during these times, the more of an effect it will have on people and what they might or might not do.
Right. See, look, Alex, I mean, you're in your experience, we're clearly living in a world where communication is so key. It's so much part of our lives now, and yet it seems to be a huge potential platform for divisiveness. How important do you think it is that we promote positive speech as much as possible?
I mean, see, I think the question for me is it's perfectly fair to have debate and to argue and to have positions. The issue is when it starts turning into ad hominem attacks, or when these positions where people are intransigent and where there's no sense of compromise, and where people use words that are far too damaging words in the debate and in the conversation. So that's the bit that's problematic, I think. And I think, yes, absolutely, today in a divided world, it's divided because of individuals who are not understanding the power of words, or in fact they totally do understand it and are using it to create that division.
Right.
So I think in the grand scheme of things, it's rare to find times where people have used negative language and not understood the power of words, right? As in, they absolutely do. They just are using it in a bad way. I think amongst all of us, for me, it's important to think before you say something, because you may not know, you may not have the intention of insulting someone or causing harm. So thinking beforehand. But when it comes to sort of the bigger topics, I think people have they want to create that reaction,
right?
Because they know the power of it.
Right. And at the very least, understand that you can't just say anything you like with impunity. To understand that as you said, your words can be spread around the world in literally seconds. And once it's out there, there's no taking it back.
Absolutely. So I think for me, it's more about the everyday person understanding the power of speech. And so for me, the practical implication of that is to listen to the other side, right? As in to hear what's happening outside of the bubbles that we live in. That's so important,
Right.
because people aren't going to stop dividing, and people aren't going to stop being racist and anti-Semitic and and mean. That's still going to happen. But I think what we need to understand is that that it is very important to listen to what they're saying and then to react accordingly.
Right. Brilliant, Alex. Thanks so much. Really appreciate
pleasure.
You
really fun
time.
chat. Yeah.
Great conversation, and wish you every success with your projects.
Thank you.
Keep doing what you're doing, because you're doing it brilliantly. So thank you so much for
so
taking the time, and it's really fantastic to be able to speak to you as part of this Clean Speak project. Thanks
Lovely
again.
to chat. Thank you.